Welcome back to Two Riders, and today we are going to talk about an American knife that started a revolution, literally, the Buck 110. Hang around and we'll get right into it. Let's go back to the year 1963 in the United States. 1963, outdoorsmen, people working outdoors, didn't have a whole lot of choices in what they had as knives. A typical little pocket knife like this from Western, 3-blade trapper, folds up pretty easily, goes into a pocket, and it's weighs in right at 3 ounces. But the blade, if you look at it, is not really suitable for working a big job, whether it's cutting large branches or trying to work on game. A couple more slip joints here. Got a K-bar with a pretty decent sized blade on it. This was built between 1930 and 1940. This is a knife I inherited. Weighs in at 6.8 ounces now. The blade's been ground down quite a bit. I've got a case from about the same era. Looks about the same. Really the difference is here you've got your little notch for your fingernail up here. Here you've got it here. But other than that, you know, intellectual property, they just kind of copied each other. They didn't care. The case knife weighs in at 7.1 ounces. Pretty heavy, pretty solid, thick spine. The problem with these knives is that if you're piercing a hide, piercing something, and cutting like this, slicing, it's fine. If you had any back pressure on it though, this blade could go forward and come up and cut your hand. So if you're, for example, I'm going to talk about deer hunting with a lot of these. If you're working on a deer-sized animal, you know, maybe something else like a fox, maybe a wild pig, which weren't that common in the States in 63. If you got up inside and were in the rib cage, something like that, and this knife, you bumped it the wrong way, you might end up coming out with as much of your blood on your hand as the animal's blood. What wouldn't happen, a knife blade that's not going to close, is something like this Hofritz. It's a fixed blade, full tang. You know, you can press on the back, it's not going anywhere. Good knife for piercing, for skinning. The iconic Buck 119. I know the video is about a Buck 110. Hold on, I'll get right to it. You might have seen this knife in a movie such as Scream, or it's one of the most widely copied fixed blades there is out on the market. Buck's been making it for a very long time. They make it out of a 520 high carbon stainless steel. The knife is sharp out of the box. It's easy to resharpen. It's nice. It's a little bit big actually on getting inside of game animals, but one thing about it is that it's long. This is a modern style sheath. The old sheath used to come up and over. But when you look at that, overall, it dangles off your belt. Same thing with the Hofritz. You're going to hop into a car or truck and ride around and then get back out. You probably don't want to put the knife on your belt until you're done riding, because this is going to dig into the seat. If you're wearing a seat belt, which not everybody did in 1963, very few people did. If you're wearing a seat belt, it's even more uncomfortable. Especially it would have been just a lap belt. What happened in 63, and really more into 64, was here's a much shorter knife, but it's a solid knife. This is the infamous, iconic Buck 110. By the way, going back to this Buck, 10.8 ounces in weight. This knife in the sheath is not light. 8.8 ounces, about 7.1 without a sheath. 7.1 ounces is a pretty heavy pocket knife, just like these guys. But this knife, instead of having a joint that just slips and no lock, it has a spine lock. Once you pull this open, if you notice this, it will squeeze in and then pop up. And it locks very solidly. Very solidly. There's very little wobble in the blade. You've got brass going all the way down and up with some ebony scales put in, brass pins. It's a beautiful knife, solid knife. I have used this knife to take a deer apart in the field, all the way from gutting it to taking it to the skinning shed, and then to taking the bone off the, the meat off the bones, packing them away in for processing when I got them home, wrapping and freezing. Great knives, sharp knives. It'll last you a lifetime. But no good deed goes unpunished, and I guess Buck wasn't able to get enough intellectual property on this. It's one of the most copied knives in the world. It came out really in full production in 1964, and this one has been back to Buck for spa treatment, which was basically sharpening it up, buffing the brass up, and it looks as good as the day it was built many years ago. Move some of these guys. But this did not stay a Buck exclusive for that long. What happened was everybody started copying it. And I'm going to show you some still pictures here in a minute. G96 was maybe one of the most blatant copiers of Buck knives. G96 is out of Japan, just a direct steel. Only G96 used 440C steel rather than 420C. Puma copied them. And here's a picture of the Puma. And then also there is a Puma here that I've got. It's a small one. This guy is pretty lightweight, has a nylon sheath on it. Puma only weighs 3.6 ounces with the sheath. One difference is that Puma is not a true back lock all the way in the back. It does lock there, and depending on how you're using it, it's pretty good. But if you squeeze down and you get part of your knuckle there, this knife will close on you without intentionally closing it. But the bigger Pumas pictured basically were made to look just like a 110. You had Kershaw copying. You had Camillus copying it. They were using a 440A steel. Schrade was unrepentant in their copy. They didn't care. The Schrade Old Timer weighs in at 6.9 ounces with the sheath, a little bit lighter than the Buck. Made from this particular one, a Model 60T nylon sheath. And okay, so you've got some brass, yeah. You got brass coming back into here. And then you've got a Deldrin, what looks like sawn plastic handle. Yeah, is that just a homage to Buck, or is it a steel? It's a steel, because hey, if you're gonna make a cola, and Coca-Cola and Pepsi are already out there, you're gonna make it taste like them. You're not gonna make a cola with some other weird taste. You're gonna just do a copy. So if you look closely in the light, you can see the tool marks on the Schrade where it looks a little unfinished, and you can see the great polish job on the Buck. Overall, the Buck is a better knife. Feels better, just more finely done. But I say, Schrade did not mind copying it. Gerber did a couple different knives. I can show you. This is, and if I mention these, the knives that you were seeing in the pictures, by 1978, 79, everybody was copying. Everybody was doing a intellectual property steal on the Buck. This is the original Gerber paperwork, and the Gerber Folding Sportsman 2 up here talks about it. The bigger Gerbers came with a sheath. They were actually bigger than the Buck 110. Folding Sportsman 2 is this knife right here. This is not a clip point, it's more of a drop point. But here you've got brass, wood, and this lock is not all the way at the back. but even if you squeeze it pretty hard, it doesn't want to shut on you. These are actually great knives. Very sharp, very thin, very slicey. I've used one of these, same thing, all the way from taking the deer from gutting it to skinning it out and then taking the meat off the bone. This is something really thin that can slip in your pocket very easily. Not a real light. Well, 4.8 ounces. Doesn't feel as heavy, obviously, as these guys, but fits in your pocket, no sheath. Gerber, a few years later, came out with a Gerber Gator, which is, clip point, covered with what they call armor hide, because they thought that the ebony and the brass on a buck or some of these others, if it got bloody and wet, it would get slippery. So the armor hide, it allows you to grip it. It gives you good purchase. Finger groove up there, does that make a difference? Probably not. The lock, put it in a slightly different place. That would probably keep it from having any kind of patent infringement. I'm not really totally in love with serrated knives as far as hunting knives go, but partially serrated, partially not. But a relatively light knife for the size of it. It's only 4.5 ounces, which is actually lighter than the folding Sportsman. Well, after everybody was not eating their lunch but stealing some of the food off the table, Buck decided, well, maybe if we can't beat them in doing certain things, we'll just join them. So this is a Buck 442, and you can almost see the word Hokies here. Buck, starting in about 1984 into the early 1990s, made the 442 in a nylon sheath, made in USA, place to put your belt through, and a little bit of Velcro. They made the knives in several different handle colors. This particular one reads Hokies. That's the nickname of the Virginia Tech football team, most of the Virginia Tech teams. Looks like a little scaled down. In fact, this is a 3 3/4 inch blade. This is a 3 1/4 inch blade. Again, a very sharp, slicey blade, light in weight. This guy is only 3.5 ounces, so real easy to carry this all day. Buck still makes other Buck Light editions. Now, does it give you the same sort of fine fit and finish? Well, here, this series of knives, they worked with a whole lot of different colleges in the 90s. They'd put the name and the mascot on it. They'd do it, little silk screening on this. It's a nice little knife. Finger grooves, that's fine. Not real slippery, maybe you get a better grip, but I never really had too much of a problem with the standard grips. But it went from one company making a spine lock to, by the time the 1970s were ending, well, probably about 78, so 15 years after the introduction, everybody was copying it, whether they were in Germany, whether they were in Japan, other US companies. Even today, you can find Chinese-made copies of the Buck 119 and the Buck 110 in some of the bargain hardware stores and online. If you ever go into a gas station that sells like a lot of hookahs and a lot of pipes and things like that and a bunch of knives, some of their knives will be fantasy sort of weird knives, and then you'll probably see something that looks a little bit like this, but only a little bit like this. And if you fold it open and it says Pakistan, hand it back to whoever's behind the counter. The Pakistani copies of the Bucks are, Pakistani knives, in my humble opinion, especially if you're going to buy them at a place that buys them cheap and marks them up, are some of the most poorly made knives with some steel that may or may not be considered normal knife steel, and probably that haven't had a good heat treatment. You're not. These days. This is a $65 knife. If you see a buck knife, or somebody says it's a buck and it looks like that, and it's $15 brand new, put it away. Cry once, buy once. You're good. That'll last you your lifetime. $15 knife, you might use it, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 trips into the woods or into the backyard or working around the house, and then it's time to throw that thing away and buy a good knife. Anyway, this knife literally changed the knife world, whether it's Asia, Europe, or the United States. Still one of the best-selling knives that Buck has, even though now they offer a wide range of knives with, that basically have a lower price point. They've got synthetic polyester or some other resin handle. It's easier for anybody to pick one of these up at well less than half the price of that, but still a classic. Thanks for tuning in. Please consider hitting a like. Please consider subscribing. And if you have any questions, just leave it in the comment section. I read the comments and I get back to people. If you got any suggestions on other outdoor topics, please go ahead and let me know that too. The next upcoming video is probably going to be on Victorinox. We'll run over some Victorinox knives and some knockoffs of Victorinox.